The Loomis method is that method people use to draw heads, where you start off with a circle, draw the ellipses to show what direction it's facing, you slice off the side, and then you can add the features on it. People have a bunch of different variations of it, but the base is pretty much always the same. We start with a sphere, and this is also where everything goes wrong, and this might be why the Loomis method doesn't work for you. No matter what method you use to draw the details, if your sphere is drawn incorrectly, the head is going to be wrong. The sphere is made up of 5 lines, technically. We have the circle, 2 lines that divide the circle in quarters, and 2 ellipses. For this sphere to be correct, these lines need to be near perfect. They don't need to be absolutely perfect, but there's a very small margin for error. This is where people, especially beginners, usually go wrong. They don't draw the sphere correctly, and then it doesn't really matter what you do on top of that because your foundation is already incorrect. The first thing we need to do is draw a circle, which sounds pretty simple, but it needs to be very close to a perfect circle. A common mistake that people make when drawing their circles is that they either slant it to one side or they make one side longer than the other. If you use a circle like this as your base, the head that you're drawing will always end up looking too wide on one side compared to the other. There isn't really an easy way to draw better circles other than working on your line control skills, which I did make a video on recently. An exercise you can do though is tracing circles, which I recommend doing slowly and with control instead of drawing them quickly because you won't really get better at controlling your muscles like that. Another thing you can do is drawing a plus and then draw the circle by drawing each quarter separately, and this will make you better at thinking about the actual shape. You could also say, why not just use the line tools to make the circle, and the issue is that your line control is still going to be bad when it comes to the rest of the lines. So until you improve your line control, the sphere will still look incorrect even if you're using the line tools. Next, we need to draw the center lines of the sphere. These are just 2 lines that are perpendicular to each other that go through the center of the sphere. The most important one is the vertical one because this determines the angle of the head. If we want to keep the head perpendicular to the ground, we need to keep this line perfectly vertical, and if we want it to be slightly angled, we need to slightly angle this line. The horizontal line isn't as important, but it is useful for when we need to draw the brow ridge ellipse, because this line is the major axis of that ellipse. The mistake you can make when drawing these lines is not having them go through the center of the circle. Later on, when we add the ellipses, they will be drawn according to both of these lines. So if these are in the wrong spot, the ellipses will be in the wrong spot, and that will result in your final proportions being wrong. So make sure that you mark the center of the circle first. Now, I also recommend deciding which direction the head will be facing because this will help you draw the ellipses. You can do this by placing a dot somewhere in the sphere and then connecting this dot back to the center of the sphere, and this will show you what direction it's facing. Before we continue, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Now recently I've been practicing 3-dimensional forms, as you can probably see from this video. It's all about drawing proper 3-dimensional spheres. To help with this practice, I actually went through Brent Eviston's Drawing in 3 Dimensions class on Skillshare. This class is all about how to draw the simple geometric forms like boxes and spheres, and he also goes over how to make some more complex forms. Then at the end of the class, we put all of these forms together, and that will help us draw actual 3-dimensional objects. This is a fantastic class for learning the basics of how to draw in perspective, and you can apply this to anything, even the human body. Brent actually has a bunch of other classes on Skillshare as well that cover other parts of the drawing process. He has a bunch of stuff on figure drawing as well. So if you're looking for some new study material, I'd highly recommend checking out his classes. Now outside of Brent's classes, Skillshare has a bunch of other stuff as well, covering basically any topic you can think of, and all of these classes are taught by industry professionals. The art and illustration category in particular probably has one of the largest selections of classes on the whole platform. There are classes on watercolor, calligraphy, fashion design, pretty much any skill that you would need as an artist. So if you want to improve as an artist in any of these categories, I'd highly recommend checking out Skillshare. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Now for the ellipses, these are probably the hardest thing about drawing the sphere because it's a very difficult shape to draw, and the way these ellipses are angled matters. I won't go into the perspective stuff, and I'll try to keep it very intuitive. I'll refer to the ellipse of the center line of the face as the vertical ellipse and the brow ridge ellipse as the horizontal ellipse. The horizontal ellipse isn't that difficult to draw. It needs to go through the dot we placed earlier, and then another thing is that this ellipse will get divided into 4 quadrants by the horizontal and vertical lines we drew earlier. You need to make sure that these quadrants have the exact same proportions, so if we flip some of these, they have the exact same shape. That's one of the characteristics of ellipses, and I guess if you want to know more about how ellipses work, you can join our Discord server, because I do have a homework exercise there about drawing ellipses, which might explain it a lot better. The vertical ellipse is a lot harder because we can't use the vertical and horizontal lines as a guide. The reason for that is that an ellipse needs a minor axis which goes perpendicularly through the surface of the ellipse, and if you think about it in 2 dimensions, this line touches the 2 least wide points of the ellipse. In the case of the horizontal ellipse, the vertical line that we drew in the sphere was its minor axis. And then an ellipse also needs a major axis, which is just a line that's always at a 90-degree angle to the minor axis, and this one touches the 2 widest points of the ellipse. So again, with the horizontal ellipse, we have the minor axis, which was the vertical line that we drew in the sphere, and then its major axis is the horizontal line, because as you can see, it's at 90 degrees to that minor axis. On the other hand, the minor axis of the vertical ellipse is a line going to a vanishing point, and the angle of this line depends on how the sphere is rotated. And to be able to figure that out, you need to think about it in terms of a box instead of a sphere. And that requires some really good perspective knowledge. What I recommend instead is just kind of guessing. There's basically 3 patterns. When the middle of the sphere lines up with its own horizon line, the vertical ellipse will be perfectly vertical. When the sphere is below its horizon line, the vertical ellipse will be angled backwards, and when the sphere is above its horizon line, the vertical ellipse will be angled forwards. This is not an actual rule, by the way, or it's not a complete rule. It's still true, but there are some specifics that I didn't explain because that would take way more time. If you do want to learn more about it, you could pick up the Complete Guide to Perspective Drawing because it does explain the whole minor and major axis thing when it comes to ellipses. So keep this kind of rule in mind, and then also make sure that this vertical ellipse is touching that point that we placed earlier. If you did this more or less right, the point where both ellipses intersect will line up with the direction the sphere is facing. This isn't an indication that everything is done correctly, but it's just one of the conditions that needs to be met. So if it doesn't line up, you didn't do it right. Now, let's do some actual attempts of drawing spheres now. The main issue that you're going to run into with drawing these forms is line control, probably. So the main thing you'll have to practice if you want to get better at drawing these shapes is your line control. Now, for the circle, I would recommend just redo the shape until you've got something that looks correct. You can rotate your paper the entire time and make small adjustments as you go, which might be really hard to do in traditional, but I mean, I guess technically you can use an eraser to do it. So once we have the circle, we need to add our vertical and horizontal lines, and then of course the angle of the vertical line determines the angle of the head. So if I have it pointing this way, we're gonna have a head that's angled, the head will be angled that way. So I guess we'll start by just having it perfectly vertical. Now the main thing here is you need to make sure it goes through the center of the sphere so that it cuts this perfectly in 2 vertical halves. And then same thing with the horizontal one, also needs to go directly through the middle so that we have 4 equal quadrants. And then once you've got these drawn, actually, you can now rotate the paper again just to see if there are any more discrepancies in the shape, and you can fix the circle as you go along. I think this looks more or less fine. Then from here we need to decide the direction the head is going to be facing. We'll just do a very simple facing this way, so we can connect both of these, and that shows that it's pointing that way. So then now we need to draw our horizontal ellipse. When it comes to drawing the horizontal ellipse, We know that the vertical line is the minor axis, which means that the horizontal line is the major axis, because this is at 90 degrees to it. And the widest points of this ellipse are going to be on the horizontal line, and in this case they'll be touching the edges of the sphere, and then the least wide points will be somewhere on the minor axis, and those won't be touching those won't be touching the edges of the sphere in most scenarios. The ellipse also has to go through this point, or it has to touch it, and there is a lot of guesswork involved when it comes to actually drawing this ellipse, so as a beginner you might struggle with it quite a bit. So I guess we need to take this distance and replicate that on this side. I think that would be right around there probably. So then we just extend the ellipse this way. And then I think on this side it's a bit too sharp, so you can adjust. Then the vertical ellipse, like I said, that one is a lot harder to draw because we don't have a minor or major axis, unless you want to think about it in terms of a box. And in this case, if we have a front plane that's facing this way, it means that our box has to be angled kind of like this, meaning that there's a vanishing point over on this side. So the minor axis of our vertical ellipse will be angled like that, meaning that our major axis will be angled like, will be angled like that. And this means that our vertical ellipse will be angled kind of backwards. That whole box thing is just really hard to do, and it does take a lot of perspective skill, so that's why I say you should just learn how to estimate the vertical ellipse. It has to go through this point as well, and we know it has to be angled backwards. So let's see, it has to go through that point, slightly angled backwards, and then it has to have kind of equal proportions. And then just to check it, we can extend this line backwards, and it has to intersect where both of those ellipses intersect with each other. So with the ellipse I've drawn, the major axis looks like that, and then that means that the minor axis will look like this, going to a vanishing point there. Those still have to go through the center of the sphere, by the way. And let's try one more. First thing is always going to be the circle. And the circle doesn't ever have to be foreshortened, by the way. A circle will always look like a sphere will always look like a circle, even in perspective. And then you might also find that there are some parts of the circle that you can draw better than the others. Like in my case, I'm pretty good at drawing this side of the circle, but then this is the only side I really struggle with. Then once we have this, we can decide the angle. I think we're going to angle it like this time. So mark where the center of the sphere is. I think it's going to be right around there. So then draw our vertical line, and then the horizontal line needs to be at 90 degrees to it. And if need be, you could use a ruler to like figure out what the 90-degree angle is. I do recommend drawing all of these lines freehand because it just ends up making you better at drawing the lines eventually. But when it comes to figuring out the 90 degrees, you could use a ruler for that. And then let's say we're going to Freeran angle this one. So we have the face pointing up like that. Now for the horizontal ellipse, again, that's pretty easy. You can just rotate this, and then we have the exact same scenario that we had on the first one, where it's just minor axis, major axis. So we rotate it like this. And then from here, make sure that it goes through that point. Keep it perfectly symmetrical across both the minor and major axis. Need to redo this side. That doesn't look perfect, especially right here, but you can just adjust it. And then for the vertical ellipse, because this thing is looking up, the vertical ellipse is going to be angled forwards a little bit. There we go. And then, of course, make sure the center of that ellipse is the center of the sphere, or lines up with the center of the sphere. And that's basically how you practice this. I would say you can draw a bunch of these, basically just as a warm-up. You could also try to find a 3D model somewhere online. I'm sure somebody has something for Blender that you can use, and then use that to like look around in 3D and actually correct your mistakes that way. And that's basically it for the video, so if you guys enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, let me know in the comments what else you want to see. Don't forget you can join our Discord server with the link in the description. You can also join the YouTube memberships if you'd like to support the channel. And then I guess I will catch you all next time.